Welcome to the second episode of Horror Movies You Should Watch. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you, and if you haven't seen last week's episode, do check it out, and if you wish to see the further upcoming episodes, feel free to hit that subscribe button. Basically, in each episode, I recommend 8 to 10 horror films of all kinds that I enjoy to all of you. Some may be known, some you may have never heard of. Either way, this series is for everybody. Let's get started. Now this week we're going to talk The Birds, directed by Alfred Hitchcock. Classic indeed. Me being somebody who has a phobia towards birds in real life, I cringe at this film, in a good way of course. If a horror movie is freaking you out, it's doing the right job. This movie basically follows Mitch, who gets followed home by a woman named Melody, who gives him a gift, 2 lovebirds. The birds eventually start attacking people, and eventually the town just gets overpowered by this massive swarm of birds attacking everybody. Again, me being greatly ornithophobic, I simply cringe at the sight of this stuff. Alfred Hitchcock is a legend though. Check out his stuff. Any of his movies are classics. Now, as you may or may not know, depending on how well you know me, I'm a big Netflix guy. I think Netflix has become a great platform for original content. Over the years, they've produced some great original shows and movies, including a movie entitled 1922. Now, this film is a bit more on the psychological thriller side of things, based on the novel by the iconic Stephen King. This movie simply follows a rancher on a farm who murders his wife and convinces his son to help him, mainly for financial growth. However, the psychological torment he suffers after will take you on a hell of a ride. It's a bit of a slow movie, but it's really well done. Quite violent at times, but quite the thriller. If you have Netflix, do check it out. Now, one of the staple franchises in the world of not just horror, but film in general, is the Friday the 13th series. I'll be one to admit that this series has given us both good and terrible movies, but for the most part, majority of them are cult classics. But my personal favorite in the entire series, the one that I feel was done the absolute best, was Friday the 13th Part 4. The final chapter. This one was done so well compared to the others. Typically these movies showcase teenagers at Camp Crystal Lake trying not to get eviscerated by Jason. This movie though took that basic plot and just added some cool elements to it, such as Tommy Jarvis, who actually gets in Jason's head a bit and strikes back at him after Jason comes back to the camp from escaping a morgue. It's really cool to finally see a threat to Jason, rather than the same thing repeating. This movie showed actual progression and had some good psychological elements to it. If you're going to watch any movies from the Friday the 13th series, this is probably the one I would recommend the most. Now, I wasn't too big on the Purge series until I saw the Purge Anarchy. It's my favorite in the entire series. If you're not familiar with the concept of the Purge, basically one night a year, the government allows a 12-hour time period in which people are allowed to murder, rob, basically commit any crime they wish to without going to jail. And these films basically show several characters executing their plans on that very night, whether it's a revenge plot, simple killing spree, gang-related crime, or simply trying to survive the night. Purge Anarchy, I feel, really did best with this concept. You're able to really get invested in each character and their story with this movie. Now, on this episode, I'm going to throw in a classic 80s slasher flick entitled Chopping Mall. It's a pretty simple idea to this movie. Some teenagers hanging at the mall, and they get locked inside the mall, and the security droids malfunction and try to terrorize them. I don't know, I like this movie. It's a little cheesy, but it's a cool slasher. Now, this is another instance where the Japanese horror films really don't hold back, and an instance where the original adaptation of the movie truly will always surpass any remakes or reboots that try to follow it. This one is a case where the original is actually just as popular as the American adaptation, and that's the original Japanese version of the movie The Ring, also known as Ringu, from 1998. If you've seen the newer versions of The Ring or the American adaptation, you should really check out this one. Basically, to those who don't know the concept of The Ring, there is this fucked up videotape, and if people watch it, they'll receive a phone call warning them that in 7 days, they're gonna die. Eventually, investigators dig up and find the origin and the meanings of this tape, and try to figure out how to break the spell. The Japanese version basically has this plot. I mean, it's the original. that should have that plot that I described, but I just tend to like it better. I find it more raw, a bit darker, a bit more eerie. You should really check it out. Now, a bit more of a semi-recent film I actually enjoyed was the movie Sinister, which came out back in 2012. This was one of the few horror movies that in this day and age that I actually found chilling, dark, and at times quite gruesome. So this true crime author, played by Ethan Hawke, is going through a downer in his career. He hasn't had a bestseller in over a decade, and at this point he's willing to do anything out of desperation to recapture that magic that he once had as an author. He moves into this house with his family and discovers a series of fucked up videotapes, pretty much snuff films, and he digs deep into them in attempts to figure out who is behind them and what they are exactly. This movie's deep, it's quite chilling. Now, a movie rather not as chilling, with a cornier title that I'm suggesting for this episode, is Sorority House Massacre. There's nothing too complex in this movie. Basically, a sorority sister becomes a victim of a mental institute patient who escaped and is raising some hell on her college campus. Again, 80s slasher plot right there. An interesting watch though. I have a soft spot for corny 80s horror flicks, I'm not gonna lie. Now, another instance where the original movie, which is also Japanese, happens to be much better, much darker, and more chilling than the American adaptations or remakes to follow it, is One Missed Call. The original Japanese version from 2003. Absolutely one of my favorites. It's just a classic. The movie follows Yumi, a younger psychology student, and her friend Yoko, who gets this voicemail on her phone, which is dated 2 days in the future, and when she plays the voicemail, it's basically her screaming and dying. Yumi begins to investigate or figure out the source of all of this, which ends up weirdly connected to her. A bit of the Ring kind of vibe, but also a bit different. I really like the plot and the idea behind it, and I feel that the original Japanese version executed it on film really well. So the final movie I wanted to bring up for this episode is another film from the 80s, but rather than it being your typical 80s slasher, as I've mentioned, this one's a bit more of a deep psychological erotic thriller. I'm talking Fatal Attraction. This movie is great because it's realistic horror. Like, this thing can actually happen to somebody in real life. This movie takes you on one hell of a psychologically twisted ride. So Dan, played by the infamous 80s erotic thriller actor Michael Douglas, is living a pretty good life. He's got a good job, money, and a great marriage to his wife Beth. They even got a daughter. But for some fucking reason, he decides to have a casual affair with a chick named Alex, who's a book editor. And Alex starts to obsessively stalk Dan and ruin his and his family's life while he hides his affair. You can see both sides of the coin here. You're like, Dan, you did kind of cheat, but Alex, you're fucking creepy. It's a pretty interesting movie, you should definitely check it out. That's all I got for episode 2. Like I said, for future content on this channel, just hit that subscribe button, and feel free to comment some of your favorite horror films or recommendations you'd like to add. Thank you for watching. Rock on.